Blood West embodies one of my favorite design principles. If you keep things simple and distinct, small changes can feel so much more impactful. It's not a particularly deep game, but from start to end it kept me very well enthralled in it. Blood West is a Weird West immersive sim that borders on cosmic horror. If that doesn't immediately make you rock hard, you either aren't me or didn't process the word stew I just threw at you. Because genre names, especially for video games, are kinda dumb sometimes, allow me to explain. Immersive sim in this context follows the lineage of games like Thief, Deus Ex, and Dishonored, focused around establishing broad mechanics and then throwing the player into various big maps with multiple objectives that give the player many ways to approach them, either through different routes, dealing with NPCs, or different playstyle approaches, with stealth often being strongly encouraged, but ultimately optional. That is the heart of Blood West. The game takes place in various corners of the American frontier that are called the Barren Lands, the name given because of its sheer hostility to all human life that drove out or killed any humans living there. The reason for this isn't stated in detail, but it's presumed humanity uncovered some horribly cursed shit that led to them unleashing dark spirits from beyond the veil of our realm. These otherworldly forces make it so few who die in the Barren Lands truly stay dead, as they become possessed and mutated into monstrosities of flesh and bone, taking on many different shapes and sizes. Your protagonist is an unknown man of great skill, taken out before the game even began, as you were laid to rest and given a seal by a native of the lands who tries to see people off peacefully. However, that didn't work, as you're brought back to life by a different form of higher power. Unlike the normal corrupting power of the Barren Lands, this one grants you a sane mind and effective immortality. From there, you're guided by the Totem of Souls to complete whatever tasks it suggests, in the hope that you can finally find peace from your newly given undead immortality. And if it wasn't apparent enough that these guys are making a classic immersive sim style game, the protagonist is even voiced by Steven Russell, the same guy who voices the protagonist in both Thief and Dishonored.
My new favorite thing.
The story itself is a great premise, but it feels like it lacks a lot of meaningful connections. No one really explains much, not just about the world, but about their own intentions or what you're even doing. The game consists of 3 chapters, and you're usually given a somewhat cold open with the explanation boiling down to, if there's a big motherfucker here, let's kill it. And the transitions between chapters doesn't fill in many blanks. There's a lot of inferring you have to make, and I'm not entirely sure how much of it's intentional or just poorly done. More on that later though. Despite the throughline of the story being very simple, the game still takes you on a journey in order to reach those endpoints. Every chapter just throws you into these big maps with only vague directions of where you might start your information hunt. From there, it's up to you to get all the information needed in order to figure out how you're going to take on the big bad. This is where its open-endedness really shines, as all the information you find just helps point you in the direction of where to go for things that are already there. If you explore enough, it's entirely possible you can stumble upon every piece of the puzzle you need before you even know what you're supposed to look for. So to that extent, if you get lucky or know what you're doing, the chapters can be quite short, as it's often only a few small tasks needed in order to actually complete each chapter. So the rest of your time will be dedicated to properly gearing up, not just for the boss fight at the end of each chapter, but just dealing with the regular enemies to even get there. The world map might be quite large, but it's also pretty dense. There's always some set of structures to search through or some entrance to an area full of loot, either supplies or various artifacts that provide some substantial buffs. The levels also wind around themselves quite well. If you start exploring, chances are the first location you find will have enough side paths taking you to and from other areas that in one fell swoop of basically walking forward, you've explored a sizable chunk of the locations. The maps flow very well to the point where I thought this game was actually fairly linear, only to finally buy the map of the area and find out it's a giant circle with shit everywhere. And it's very much worth your time to search for everything you can, because this game is challenging. It's not break your cock on a rock difficult, but it is quite punishing if you become too brazen. This is because the difficulty doesn't really come from enemies being uniquely difficult to take on in isolation, but more so that they will wear you down if you don't plan accordingly. Enemies hit hard, but not overly so. Because of this, if you do take damage, it's a drain on your supplies. These aren't exactly scarce, but they can be depleted pretty quickly if you're careless. You most likely will die due to your own hubris quite a few times. Some criticisms I have towards the enemies is that their AI is very straightforward and pretty abusable. Unless they have some quirk that makes them do something different, they will generally try and run at you in a straight line. Even enemies who try and keep distance, if you just walk inside of a building, they feel compelled to run inside to try and shoot you, so you can very easily cheese a lot of enemies if you're not out in the open. Also, some enemies can cause bleed, which I get the idea. A long-term, low-damage bleed that slowly drains your materials if you don't patch it up quick, but all it really means is you just have a bunch of inventory spaces and one of your consumable slots taken up by bandages. That's it. Especially later in the game where they introduce heavy bleed, where you probably will die if you don't patch it up. Thankfully, death isn't punished that hard individually. It gets worse when you die repeatedly. Every time you die or rest in a bed, enemies respawn, but only on a chance. So you could get lucky and almost nothing comes back, or the game can just tell you to go fuck yourself and just about everything revived. You also gain a curse which debuffs you until it's cleared. The curse stacks up to 3 times, with each stack getting worse until it completes. Then if you die again, you get another curse to build up. The first level is minor, 5% debuff. The second one jumps to a noticeable but manageable 15%. Die a third time, a brutal 50%. And it's not a minor stat that gets hit either. You can have 50% reduced max health or stamina. There are ways to purge curses, or even stop you from getting one in the first place, that are pretty easy to do, but both the items involved have multiple helpful uses, and can cost money if you do run out, which sucks pretty early on, so it's better to just avoid dying. Which is where understanding the enemies and their weaknesses comes in. There's a number of enemies across each chapter, some repeating from prior chapters, but generally you will face a completely new set of enemies for each chapter. I won't go too in-depth, as figuring out how each enemy behaves is part of the experience of the game. Taking a look at Chapter 1, you have the most basic set of enemies, but it demonstrates how they change things up quite well. There are basic enemies that really aren't that special, like the normal undead, but the normal undead still does quite a lot of damage in melee with a chance to bleed. But you quickly find a variant called the half-risen undead, who is still wearing his coffin. With his coffin on, they throw very slow-ranged projectiles, making them barely a threat. But if you break it, they become a normal undead, which can be bad in some situations. Thankfully, you can shoot their head through the tiny hole, shoot their limbs, or just Admittedly, this random variant has some of the most interactions of any enemy, but each enemy having their own unique behaviors and possible weaknesses is seen across the game. Another example is the next enemy you're likely to encounter, the spirits. These guys are ethereal enemies, meaning they take less damage from everything but silver ammo unless they have another weakness as well. But that's not to say you can't take them out with normal bullets, it's just that it's going to be a lot more drawn out and you risk taking damage. That said, I do find the damage type weaknesses to be a little underutilized. There's 4 bullet types in the game: normal, silver, gold, and fire. Fire bullets I found to be so weak they barely feel like it does anything unless you fight the 2 enemies that it can set on fire well. Silver doesn't do anything special unless you're fighting ethereal enemies, which only consist of 1 regular enemy per chapter. Even enemies that appear to do ethereal attacks don't count as ethereal enemies, despite the game setting the precedent early on that you don't have to be a ghost to count as ethereal. Gold is similar in that only 2 enemies are weak to it, overlapping with another ammo type, but unlike silver, it at least does double damage to everything, period. And while I'm on the topic of murdering things, one of my favorite details in this game, and I'm still not sure if this is intentional, is that ragdolls are kind of weird. Normally in games, things just kind of flop around, but here the ragdolls are kind of stiff, and sometimes not, which leads me to believe they tried to simulate rigor mortis. I could very well be looking into this way too much, but if I'm right, give whoever thought of this a raise. And going back to damage types, thankfully there are more options to work with than just bullet types. Stealth is the first thing you're introduced to and demonstrates how powerful sneak attacks are. The stealth mechanics are straightforward and very discreet. Enemies will only become alert once the detection bar fills up, but it's not just based on if they see you or if you make a loud enough noise. It's a combined progress of any movement with any kind of visuals. Even when crouching, you generate detection, so you can't just crouch walk right at everything without upgrading your sneaking. So early on, sneaking is fairly slow going since you have to stop every now and then to let that meter decay. Dropping off ledges also generates a set amount of noise based on how far you fell. If you keep it too high, you risk something turning around and filling up the rest of that meter with sight detection. Despite appearing as just one bar, it does track every enemy separately, so you can be seen by someone further away while the bar is showing only the person you're sneaking behind. That's pretty much all there is to it. It doesn't even take into account things like what kind of surface you're walking on or any kind of lighting. So even sneaking in water is just as quiet as sneaking on land. You're just slowed in water. Enemies also don't investigate sounds you make or places they've spotted you. You can have an enemy walk right past you, stare you down, and if the meter doesn't fill up, they just keep on trucking. They will check out impacts from your infinite use rock distraction, which can get a bit silly because if you keep throwing rocks in front of them, every enemy will just keep their backs to you and build up no detection unless you hit them directly. They also inspect dead bodies if something was just killed, or they'll inspect impacts from your thrown weapons. As rudimentary as it is, I like this stealth system. It's very gamey, but it's incredibly consistent and doesn't encounter the problem many stealth games have, where you make one slight misstep and it completely changes the enemy's pathing as they look for the source of that noise or whatever they saw, and it ends up in a huge cacophony of fuck-ups as you try and play around the AI being a bit unpredictable now. And because enemies are far more plentiful than your ammo, melee will be a large part of your arsenal in this game. The melee system isn't particularly deep once again. You have light attacks, you have heavy attacks, both eat stamina, but if you have no stamina, you can still spam light attacks without issue. You're just locked out of heavy attacks and sprinting, which means prolonged melee fights can be difficult to escape from without cover or the right setup. If you do have ammo or face something you'd rather not try and take out with your bare hands, you have a few options. Most of them are your classic cowboy repertoire. Revolvers, lever-action rifles, normal and sawed-off double-barrel shotgun, bows, pistols, and crossbows. Initially, you only get rusted and normal variants of the firearms, but from there, every weapon you get will be a unique and named variant with altered stats and various mechanics. And yes, it passes the double-barrel vibe check. And that is your main reward for exploring the world, alongside accessories which can be equipped for bonuses that are always active. Between that and the unique traits on named weapons, you have a lot of flexibility in how you want to build your character that greatly expands as you go through the game, since as you level up, you also gain perk points that can be used in specific skills that further reinforce whatever you want to do. I do love me some build variety, and there are plenty of options to go for, from full glass cannon, full sneaky peeky, or just be an absolute monstrous tank who walks up to enemies and slices them until they inevitably fall, while crying about how few ways there are to actually regenerate HP in large chunks. Hell, you can even spec into being an alcoholic with a number of weapons that give you boosts while you're drunk. This is where some of the jank starts to seep in, though. You'd think being drunk is kind of obligatory when you're under the effects of an alcohol's buff. But no, the status of being drunk is a separate negative effect, and when you upgrade the alcohol skill, the line negative effects from alcohol is decreased. Not only does it apply to the strength of the vision distortion, but also the duration. So if you try and use that skill to spec into alcohol-based gaming, it actually cuts the duration you can take advantage of them by 80%. Since the phrase "is further decreased by" means it stacks on top of the previous levels of skill, which also means skills like the max HP boost go from a mediocre sounding 30% to actually being closer to 70% extra health. Speaking of health scaling, sometimes it makes little sense. Some accessories give you flat bonuses that seem to scale with percentage-based bonuses, but other times it doesn't. Here I have 380 HP due to my perks and 3 HP boosting accessories. One grants 100 flat HP, the other two grant 25% and 20 HP respectively. So how much HP do you think I'd lose if I equipped this amulet that gives me 40 HP in place of 100 flat HP? Did you guess something like 60 or greater due to the percentage health scaling? You'd be wrong. I lost 10 health. Now, let me swap this 25% health item for another 20% health instead. How much health did I lose? Trick question. I gained 7 health. Funny math aside, the quality of loot you find is pretty good. Despite everything having bright yellow names, long flavor text, sometimes the stuff you find is pretty tame. Like a shotgun that's only perk is doing more damage than the base shotgun and heals 5 HP on a headshot. But that in itself is pretty nice since there aren't many sources of consistent HP in the game. But then there's also a lot of really creative weapons, like the Spirit Tomahawk that does slightly less damage and is slightly slower than the normal Tomahawk, but it returns to you, making it a nice companion to melee setups. Or at the start of Chapter 2, you get this consumable healing item. It's instant, save for the time it takes to use it from a menu, grants 200 HP on the spot rather than over time, but has one little quirk. It spawns a giant Deathstalker somewhere in the map. That mild fear of, I could backtrack and there'll be a Deathstalker somewhere I have to deal with, was slightly tense, because if you aren't prepared to deal with them, they can absolutely destroy you. Or, my favorite item in the game, the Chaos Die. Every 5 minutes it rolls the dice, and you get an effect. A 1 gives you a full heal, a 2 sets your health to 5, a 3 makes you lose $10 on damage taken, but you gain $10 when you deal damage. 4 removes all your curses, 5 spawns loot at your feet, mostly ammo, and 6 just sends you to fucking Brazil. I mean, that's not part of it. Motherfucker teleported me! I was stashing shit! Ooh, loot. I'm just sitting there bent over my loot box sorting shit, and I'm just going like, ah! Gone. Sent to Brazil. And what's even weirder is that the teleport actually isn't to a completely random location like it suggests, though that would be hilarious. It actually sends you to unique caves very high up in the mountains that you can't get to normally, period. There's also tons of accessories to help you take advantage of just about every quirk or debuff in the game, like demons who spawn vape clouds letting you gain buffs off huffing their fumes, or buffs while you're bleeding. Even if I didn't want to lean a specific way while playing, I was always excited to see what new loot I'd get, because I could usually use it to boost my character in some way. And by the end of the game, you become a god in comparison to what you were. In my case, I went full melee tank with over 400 HP from the starting 120, and I had a dagger that reduced enemy damage by 40% when I hit them. I just walk up to enemies and start stabbing. And keep stabbing. Absolutely nothing stood a chance against me while I stagger locked them with dagger headshots. Then I realized my potions only heal me for 70 HP over 20 seconds still. But hey, this 1 HP every 3-second regen was a huge help because of all the downtime I had shifting through my inventory, because holy shit, this thing fills fast. I hope you like inventory Tetris, because there is no way around it. There's pretty much only one shop in each chapter. The maps are so big you can't regularly go back and forth where you are and to the shop to sell stuff without spending a resource to go back to a bed you discovered. So your inventory fills fast, because you need all the supplies you can carry. So do yourself a favor and immediately max out the strong back skill. Seriously, it's a lifesaver. Not just for the inventory space increase, but it makes monster items stackable in greater numbers. This seems good as is, but it affects some monster drops that only stack to 1 by default, so if you want to carry these cultist teeth around that take up 4 grid spaces for money, you can then go from carrying 1 to carrying 5. It feels so inconsistent which ones are considered stackable monster parts and which ones are just normal accessories, but regardless, it's a huge boost in your kleptomaniac spree. Let's be real, if you're playing a game like this, you will absolutely steal everything not nailed down. But as much as I personally love inventory Tetris, I do hate one thing. Your backpacks do not auto-sort at all. You can buy some loot containers to hold more shit, but they don't behave like an extension of your normal inventory. Everything will go to your main inventory no matter what until it fills up first. If you have duplicate items that can stack in a backpack, things can still go to your inventory and hitting the auto-sort button doesn't transfer them over to the backpack. The backpacks also don't have their own auto-sort, so they just look like a jumbled mess of crap all the time. You can't transfer things from your backpack to your stash chest. If you open up your backpack, it takes up the left side of the screen where your stash chest would be, so you have to transfer it to your main inventory, close the backpack, then stash it. It doesn't work like this for shops either. Opening up the backpack takes over the main inventory screen, so you can sell and buy shit into specific slots as you please. It's probably the biggest annoyance I had in this game, especially when I was already in the inventory screen long enough, because Garrett keeps screaming at me that I have a hoarding problem. The problem is I don't have big enough pockets! Also, the art in this game rules. The cutscenes are all hand-drawn with a level of animation that shows how much they tried to squeeze quality out of the resources they had. Very detailed scenes with some really good cinematography, all handled with very few frames of animation. Stuff like this just oozes passion. This also extends to the main menu art, which actually changes depending on the chapter you're at. Small touches like that really help me fall in love with this game. Enemy designs are also pretty good, even with the crunchy Marvel quality. I'm absolutely a sucker for Weird West, but they have some really banging enemy designs that push the feeling of anything that was once human sure as fuck isn't anymore. Even the creatures that technically still are. Which makes these Native American ghost ladies all the more weird. Not only do they have the highest quality models in the game, by far, but no other enemy really has idle animations, let alone animations this good, and having multiple sets of them. Between that and having so few clothes, I fear I might get smote by YouTube if I don't blur them out. I'm convinced someone had a little too much fun designing these characters. Who am I kidding? I don't make money off this shit anyways. I do wish they did more with the actual environments though. They look good, but they are pretty generic themes. Caves, mines, desert, swamp, mountains. Chapter 3 actually manages this by shaping the terrain and some of the features around the focal point of the chapter's objective. You have a giant demon-filled chasm in the center, and the immediate vicinity are pools of blood with enemies that inhabit them, which gives a much more memorable flair to it. But it doesn't surprise me, since this game was in early access and Chapter 3 just feels far and away the most high-quality chapter. The only major gripe I have with this game is that the story exists. I mentioned earlier that the story just goes on without much connection to it. Between each chapter, there's a cutscene that sets you up to appear in the next chapter, but barely gives you any explanation. Going from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2, you kind of just pass out and wake up at the start of the next chapter, which is a fucking awesome cutscene, don't get me wrong, but you're kind of just there. Going from Chapter 2 to Chapter 3 has more setup, but the reason why you're even on that journey in the first place is a bit nebulous. It builds up to the ending of the game feeling extremely flat. I absolutely loved the final cutscene. The art and the imagery behind it was excellent, but the actual meaning behind it was pretty dog shit unless they plan to make a Blood West 2. So, spoilers ahead, skip to the timestamp on screen. So, in a surprise twist of events that absolutely no one could have seen, the Totem of Souls, who sounds like every 10-pack you're smoking villain in media, combined into one was actually using you the whole time. This could explain why literally no one told you what you were doing. Even the third-party person who takes you off course could have been working with the Totem of Souls, but the lack of any information just felt weird. It's not like you have any choices to make yourself. If the Totem of Souls just told you to do everything you were doing in Chapter 3 in order to kill a big evil, you'd do it all the same because it's not like you knew what you were doing in the first place. So once you defeat him, the dude just laughs and says, "Lol, I won, Lamau," and goes on about how he isn't going to rescind your powers of undead immortality, so you can watch helplessly as he unleashes hell on humanity for all eternity until your spirit is finally broken and you submit to him once again. Again, the visuals? Fantastic. It goes hard. But it's such a wild turn. I'm not expecting a good ending, just one that at least justifies the boss fight even happening. It's one thing to instill the feeling of pointlessness in an enemy like that from a story perspective, but when it translates to gameplay, it feels less than pointless. It actually just feels kind of dumb. Why would he even stop to try and kill me if I can't kill him and he won't let me die permanently? I'd chalk it up to this game taking inspiration from cosmic horror, but very little in the game actually gives you that impression. It was more so generic supernatural stuff than it did eldritch horror. But despite that bad ending, the game does immediately kick off the credits with a fucking music video. No joke, they partnered with a band called Ghoul to make a music video for Blood West, and it goes absolutely hard. If you want to watch the whole thing, it was used for their release date trailer. but as a post-game cutscene, it still very much works. And kind of gives me a weird amount of nostalgia over going to movie theaters as a kid, and often seeing movies end in some really silly animation backed by a cover song that kind of got me way too fucking excited over seeing a movie ending. And I think the highest praise I can give Blood West is, even after a 24-hour long playthrough and a disappointing ending, I genuinely wanted more. Normally by the end of a game, I start to rush a little. I'm usually still having fun, but it's wearing on me a little, and I'd rather it end on a high note and just stop playing. But after beating the game, I went right into the DLC. So let's talk about it. First things first, the price can be a little tough to justify. In terms of content, it's just one chapter for $15 when the base game is $25. But based on what they did with it, I had a lot of fun. You play as a new protagonist that does seem to have some time with the base game, tasked with completing one major deal with an otherworldly being in exchange for a second chance at life. Once this is completed, you're free to go. So you set off largely in the exact same way as the main game. You begin exploring to try and find clues, but you're immediately hit with a few new aspects to the game. Your character is able to commune with spirits. So not only can you find ghosts to speak with that act as a way of introducing many more NPCs into the world than normal, but it also means whenever you kill enemies, you take their soul essence. This is a secondary currency that your informant will accept in exchange for stuff from her shop. She only handles soul essence. So now you effectively gain money for every kill as opposed to needing to loot their bodies and sell shit later for cash. Cash still exists and there are still merchants that take money, but now you have another store for extra supplies and unique equipment. The rate at which you get these soul essences is pretty good as well. After the initial part of the DLC, I barely had to worry about killing enemies specifically for soul essence. There's also a lot of new weapons to this DLC, not just unique loot of existing weapons, but also completely new weapon classes. Spears, a blowgun that can fire a number of debuffing darts, staves that are a mix of melee and ranged, voodoo dolls, and even allowing you to build into a summoner playstyle. Though I am still slightly upset I spent a good chunk of the DLC farming up minion spawning items to turn the final boss into a chew toy, only to find out that not only does the boss fly, but it straight up doesn't allow summons in the arena, period. This new arsenal of weapons also comes with a new skill tree to go along with it. It's smaller because it is only one chapter, but I also find it to be a lot more interesting than the base game skill tree. Interesting new abilities like granting you the ability to eat items you get from enemies that you would normally equip in order to gain one of their effects, but for a limited time. Healing you when killing enemies with water, and even making it so alcohol is now a viable way to heal, especially if you have higher HP pools because it's percentage based. It's not just new weapons and skills, but also a whole suite of enemies that are, in general, much more interesting to fight than the base game enemies. But it has its problems. First off, it's another swamp level. Now, while I like swamps, Miyazaki be praised, and this still looks good, it's just a very similar environment to Chapter 2. It does introduce one new environment, being an alternate dimension you can jump in and out of, but man, it could not look more bland. You're either staring at incredibly gray desert canyons, or the inside of ruins that look all the same. Just the same square brickwork all over. It looked so samey to the point where I actually got lost a few times, which wasn't a thing that really happened that often in the main game. And it still has a lot of random decisions here and there that just seem weird. Like early on, you find this consumable that boosts soul essence gain by 50%. You just turn this music box and for the next few minutes, it boosts soul gain. It doesn't make noise that draws attention, it doesn't have a use limit, you just have to remember to use it? So for a good chunk of this DLC, you just keep cranking at every enemy encounter and hear this music box go off constantly. Or spending a large chunk of the DLC working on an optional side quest to make a custom ultimate weapon to take on the boss, only for one of the choices to be a shotgun, and the boss flies like 40 meters away well out of the shotgun's range. So it depends on how much you value the quality of stuff versus the amount of stuff when it comes to this DLC. I'm more than satisfied with all the new stuff I got to play with and the various characters that got introduced. The game has some fun character writing, even if it's not exactly intricate. Especially this one fucking skeleton, who supposedly has been alive for centuries, and talks about how pointless everything is like some kind of pseudo-intellectual who just discovered what atheism is.
But I'm not stopping you. After all, you're a speck on the horizon of my eternity. There is no hope. My birth name is lost to the more forgotten past. My desires are non-existent, but much of my very soul was harvested.
Alright, I'm gonna have to do something for this man real quick. This dude is so fucking edgy. The DLC also refines the Eldritch horror themes, and it actually shines through, beyond the obvious fishing village with random tentacles sprouting out of everything for some reason. The story of what happened in the village and its residents, alongside hinting at a much grander order of supernatural beings, while leaving plenty of room for speculation, makes it way more compelling and scratches that cosmic horror itch. It did what the base game tried to do, and actually nailed it. So that's Blood West. A great reminder why I absolutely love budget titles that try and focus more on a few core strengths rather than trying to make games as big and needlessly complicated as possible. It's got flaws, but it has a hell of a lot of charm. I tried avoiding bringing up its obvious callbacks to older PC immersive sims, but I gotta say, it does a good job at feeling like something that came out in the early 2000s, for better or worse. Oh right, and the DLC has its own main menu art. Okay, who the fuck